Welcome to Story Hour, a virtual meetup hosted by Wolf and Heron.
All right, Sarah, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So I am not going to tell you the story of my brand. I'm going to tell you the story of a brand I admire and how Coco Chanel came to America. So Coco Chanel was born in 1883 in France, and she was born to quite a poor family, and her parents died very young, and she became an orphan. And much like orphans in the world at that time, they went in a couple different directions, and one of the directions young women went in when they lost their parents was to become a prostitute. So Coco Chanel became a courtesan in her teenage years, and at the age of 25, she became the courtesan of a wealthy man in Paris. So this was in 1908. So what was really lovely about this man is he really loved her and really respected her and supported her in anything she wanted to do. And what he discovered in the young Coco Chanel was that she was quite smart and had a lot of style. So they would get into long conversations about these subjects and more in politics, and they became very good friends. Now, he was a very wealthy man. So because they were really friends now, and he supported her, she could pretty much do what she wanted to. So Coco Chanel was always going against the grain. And she decided that fashion was boring and that she wanted to do it her way. So when she was in her mid-20s, towards 30s, when she was turning 30, she started wearing the clothes of this boyfriend of hers. And that was very against the times because women wore dresses and men wore pants. And the hats that women wore looked a certain way and the hats that men wore looked a certain way. So she would mix the genders in her clothing. And one day, she really started to experiment with her hats, and she got a lot of attention about her hats. So because this man was so wealthy and ran in big circles of people, the women in those circles started to really love her hats. So they started to buy her hats, and this is how the Chanel brand started. So she goes along and is selling these beautiful hats for a lot of money, which, by the way, were made from really cheap pieces and parts that she found all over the city. And she started to make a lot of money. Now, this boyfriend of hers was actually a very good marketer as well. And so he taught her everything she needed to know about marketing. So pretty soon, Chanel, who was a orphan courtesan, now has one of the hottest fashion houses in France in the early 1920s. So she goes along with much success, and she's very popular, and she launches her Chanel No. 5 brand, and she is just top of the market. Everybody is looking to Chanel because she is the picture of the modern woman, and she influenced scores of people in television, in media of all kinds. Well, World War II broke out. And what happened in World War II, as you know, the Germans took over France, and Hitler settled into Paris. Well, it turns out that Chanel was on the side of Hitler, and she was actually a Hitler sympathizer. So you can imagine that did not go over so well when the war was over. So the war is over. Everybody's getting back to, whatever the new normal is then. And France turns against her. So in fact, all of Europe turns against her. And in fact, so much that she has to leave France to go to Switzerland to escape ridicule. And so Coco Chanel spends about a decade in Switzerland with a ruined company. Nothing. She has nothing. She has some money from friends and what she had attained just through her working. And then finally she decides that she needs to relaunch. So what does she do? She decides, well, I'm not welcome in Europe. I'm going to go to America. So Chanel starts to become a popular brand in America. And that is how Coco Chanel came to America. And the moral to that, I would say, is even if your business gets ruined, and it gets ruined in any particular way, if people abandon you, there is always someone in the world who will appreciate what you do So it is a lesson in pushing through and perseverance.
Okay.
Bravo, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I didn't know that story.
I know. I just
learned today.
I was like, that's a hell of a brand story. That's where I'm at right now.
That's cool. All right. So what was really good about Sarah's story that she should hold on to? Yeah, Kara.
I thought it was clear that while it did not sound like you were reading, it was clear you had prepared and picked like the choice details, right? You did not, there's probably Wikipedia article upon Wikipedia article about that topic. And you didn't talk about too many things. You probably actually could have cut it down just a smidge more too, but still, like you were thoughtful and you went through and you didn't hem and haw. And I think for something that's not memorized and also to still sound somewhat natural, like that's hard to do. So I thought that you did that very well.
Thank you.
Other things that you liked about the story? Yep.
So I thought it was particularly interesting subject matter. I mean, we had Nazis, we had fashion, style, orphans, like it's just across the board. So as far as an interesting topic goes, I think you nailed it. Especially since it kind of, if men like me are listening, like I don't really look at Coco Chanel articles, but it allowed me to kind of have an interest in this human being who created this this fashion brand. So that's
cool.
Thanks.
Cool. What are some things that Sarah could do to experiment, make the story more compelling? Go ahead, Kara.
I have so many ideas. I don't know, maybe because I normally don't hear stories like this, it made me feel creative. So these aren't so much criticism as ideas. But so because you're talking about fashion, I think you could really lean into physicality. So like it would be fun for you to imagine like the hat, right? Or the clothes. Like how can you very simply, not overdo it, but how can you very simply like bring that into some of your gesturing? Another idea is, what if you told the story without saying that it was Chanel at the beginning? And then we find out it's Chanel. That would be a way of inviting curiosity, because we're kind of like, oh, this is just a story about this prostitute. And then we find out that it's Chanel, and Chanel has this, all of these plot elements that we had no idea. And then I would also think about like, why is it interesting to you? And maybe it's not insanely interesting to you that you want to make a whole point about it, but it's always, like you're not just trying to teach it to us, right? Like, why do you find fashion interesting or Chanel interesting? It doesn't have to be a long period of time, but how can you fit that into the beginning or throughout the story somehow?
Yeah. That's part of our keep it real superpower, is like when you're telling a story, you do want to bring in at least some component of you as the storyteller, and why is the story meaningful for you?
Okay.
Good idea. I think so. Like my thought was that you actually had a very clear kind of moral and thought at the end. This idea that like, if the society leaves you, hold on, because there's more, right? And I think the thought that I had in terms of bringing that theme forward throughout, like letting that silver thread carry across your story, would be to use some language around being abandoned or being left behind in various moments throughout. Like, she's an orphan, she's been abandoned, right? She doesn't have a lot of options. And then, and then she gets abandoned again. And finding these ways to kind of, I don't know if abandon is the right word, but like if you can choose a word that you come back to over and over again, so that when you do kind of land your theme, we've been kind of like warmed to what it is.
Oh, great. Oh, cool. All right. Well, I've got some work to do on that one then.
So I'll come in real quick. Sorry, Pablo, I didn't mean to cut you off. But the one thing I wanted to say is, when you started the story, I didn't really have an idea of why you were telling it to us. So I was kind of just, I sat down and politely was along for the ride. But there was a question that constantly kind of came along, which was like, why are we hearing this? Because it's not a story about you. It seems that you maybe just chose a story that was interesting. And so at the end, you tied it up really well. I think Stephanie said it, like you connected everything. But I think in order to have more of my attention and deliberation, perhaps lay out where you're going from the beginning. And you don't have to reveal who the person is, as she said, or do anything like that. But if you just kind of give us something to look forward to and then take us on a journey, that might give us a little bit more reason to follow along as you're speaking.
Oh, that's great. That's great advice. Thank you.
Pablo, what was your thought?
Yeah, something that as soon as I heard that she was a follower of Hitler, it made me actually, be a little judge about her. I'm like, oh my gosh, why I'm getting these feelings? And I go, what is the integrity then of the brand? What is the integrity of the then and now? And so it's a little, something to think about. I don't wear Chanel, but hey, that was my question.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think it's interesting that detail about her being a Nazi sympathizer does create sort of a weird emotional response in the audience, and I can imagine that will be true for most of your audience, right? And so it's like kind of trying to figure out how to drop that detail, because it is an important, relevant detail, and yet like you want people to be rooting for Coco Chanel. Right. And so like, how do you marry these two? I don't have an answer, but it is an interesting.
Well, or think
about
how would the story change if you know that people aren't rooting for her once they find that out. Yeah. Do you decide to focus somewhere else? Because I do think that's, like it's not like an uncommon thing that people hear Nazi and are like, no, I don't like that. That's going to be a relatively, like, it's not like know your audience. I wonder what my audience is going to think about that. Like, it's a pretty common response to Pablo's point. And so, does that make you then want to just like think about it from a different perspective in terms of like what you decide the point is? Or just how you share the point. You'd be like, I don't admire everything about Coco Chanel and the story, certainly, but here's the one thing I take away from that. Like there's, just something to consider.
Yeah, framing.
That's a good point.
I think you introduced it at a good time because everybody wants to root for the underdog. That's like the American dream, is to start from nothing, hit a rock bottom, and then be wildly successful. But you introduce it at the end when when we're feeling really bad for her, Hitler comes in and destroys the economy and owns everything. They're like, oh, she actually liked Hitler and was with him. And then we're just like, we don't really care how much.
I'm so emotionally confused.
She goes to America. Yeah. It's like a normal story arc, but then you just get whiplashed from a total different angle.
It is. When I heard this story, it did the same thing to me. I was like, she what? Yeah. I'm like, I got to reevaluate whether or not I like this brand anymore, or what.
And that's a soundbite. And that's a soundbite in your telling.
Yeah.
Like to make the story feel like you connect to your story, right? It's like when I heard that, I was like, what? Right? Like that's what you can say, right? As a way to bring you in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a remarkable story. And she made a colossal mistake. Choosing the wrong people to hang with, and as we know, groupthink it just makes you stupid.
Right.
So
there's another theme. Well, thank you all for a lovely story hour. It's one of my favorite hours of the week.
Oh my gosh, she's becoming mine too.
And looking forward to the next one. We have several new ones up on the website. So if you're not registered and you want to be, just go ahead and register yourself. And it's always lovely. And thank you so much.
Visit wolfandheron.com to find out more about our story hours.